you guys are staying dry. There's a lot of water out there. I do want to go ahead and apologize for not being here for a little over 2 weeks. To be quite honest and full disclosure, I was just not in the right headspace, just not in the mood to film. So I do want to go ahead and say sorry about that. For those of you visiting for the first time, hi, my name is Kai, and basically on this channel, we talk about all true crime cases that happen in the 808 state. I do hope you hit that subscribe button and put on your notification bells so that when I do upload, you'll be notified first. Let's jump into today's case. Peter Kema Jr. was known to family and close friends as Peter Boy. So for this video, we're going to refer to him as Peter Boy. Peter Boy was born on May 1st, 1991 to parents Peter Kema Sr. and Jaylin Kema. Peter Boy was Peter and Jaylin's first child together, but this was actually Jaylin's third child. See, Jaylin already had 2 other children from her previous relationship with William Collier. At the time, she had a little boy named Alan and a little girl who she named Chantel. The family lived at Nanawele Estates in Hilo on the Big Island. From the day Peter Boy was born, his days were really numbered. You see, before even Peter Boy was born, the Kemas were already accused of child abuse of the 2 older children, Alan and Chantel. On May 8th, 1991, just a week after Peter Boy was born, the kids were removed from the household because of abuse of the 2 older children. The kids were placed with Jaylin's parents, James or Jimmy Acole, they called him Jimmy, and Yolanda Acole. On May 14, 1991, a DHS caseworker reports to family court stating that Alan, who was 4 years old at the time, said that Peter Kema Sr. would hit him, his sister, and his mom. Alan would say that Peter Kema Sr. would spank him on his arms, his legs, and his okole, using both of his hands and a broom. Of course, when the parents are asked about this, both Kemas deny ever hurting the kids. On June 26, 1991, so about a month and a half after the kids were removed from the Kemas household, the 2 older kids are returned back to the parents. On July 8, 1991, a DHS social worker asked the family court to reconsider placing Peter Boy back into the Kemas care because of the history of child abuse of the 2 older children. Unfortunately, the state does not listen to this request, and Peter Boy is returned back to his parents. On August 8, 1991, when Peter Boy was only 3 months old, he's admitted to Hilo Hospital. Peter Boy's mom said that he was fussy and she didn't know what was wrong with him. But after admitting him into the hospital and taking x-rays of Peter Boy, doctors find that Peter Boy has new and old fractures of his shoulder, his elbow, his ribs, and his knee. Immediately, all 3 of the kids are removed from the Kemas and placed with the grandparents. The 2 older children are placed with the grandparents, the Acoles, and Peter Boy spends his time between foster care and the grandparents. On August 14, 1991, a guardian by the name of Edith Rattle recommends DHS consider the Kemas parental rights be terminated sooner than later because of non-compliance with their service plan. So on October 31st, 1991, a psychologist by the name of John Wiggerts has a report after meeting with both Peter Kema Sr. and Jaylin Kema. And I'm going to read it because I don't want to get it wrong. So this is directly from his report, and this is a quote. So the psychologist says, and I quote, Jaylin and Peter both come across as extremely needy and emotionally immature persons who are evasive of responsibility and who displace the source of difficulties onto others. They appear to be so wrapped up in their own adjustment problems and unhappiness to the point that this compromises their ability to be empathetic and understanding of the children's needs. And neither of them come across as particularly child-oriented, end quote. John goes on to say that both parents are at risk for abusing the children. So on November 15, 1991, the state decides to give all three children over to the Acoles. And the state reports that over the last 3 months, the Acoles, which is the grandparents, would visit the kids more often than the biological parents, Peter Kema Sr. and Jaylin Kema. And the state also noted that the grandparents, would visit the kids more often, and they lived over, 50 miles away, while the parents would not even visit them, and they lived less than 5 miles away. So November 15, the kids are handed over to the grandparents, which is great. And then for the next 3 years, the children are raised in the grandparents' home, and the grandparents take wonderful, wonderful care of them. So a lot of the pictures, if not all, that you see of the kids and of Peter Boy are all from the time when the kids were with the grandparents. On July 7th, 1994, basically everyone is telling the state and asking the state not to return the kids and Peter Boy back to the Kemas because of their history of child abuse. The grandparents are against it, the guardian is against it, the foster parents are against it, but unfortunately, the state does not listen to their request. And on July 25th, 1994, Peter Boy is returned back to his biological parents. Now, on June 11th, 1995, about 1 year after Peter Boy was returned back to the Kemas actually gained permanent custody of the 2 older children. And so I'm just assuming that they must have been complying with their service plan, whether that was to take parenting classes or whether that was to check in, stay off of drugs or whatever that they were asked to do. I am assuming because the kids were returned that they were in compliance with that. On August 17, 1995, an attorney for the Acoles, so this is their the kids' maternal grandparents, an attorney for the Acoles writes a letter to the social worker concerned that the biological parents, the Kemas, were not abiding by their agreement to allow the Acoles to have visitation with the children. Now you got to remember that the grandparents took in the kids for, over 3 years and basically raised them, nurtured them and loved them. And they had an agreement that the visitations would continue when the kids returned back to Peter Kema Sr. and Jaylin. But unfortunately, Peter and Jaylin were not abiding by this agreement. Now, this is frustrating because after all of the requests from, multiple people, in October of 1995, the state closes the case, right? The Kemas have the children back, all 3 of the kids. They gain permanent custody of the kids, and that's it. Once the state closes the case, they close the case. They don't do periodic checks. That's it. In December of 1996, the Acoles see Peter Boy at a family funeral for the last time. The grandpa, Jimmy Acole, said that Peter Boy had a black eye and an injured arm. On February 23, 1997, Peter Kema Sr. finishes probation for a 1990 burglary that he participated in. On April 4, 1997, Peter Boy's 15-year-old cousin reports that Peter Boy suffered a broken arm and that Peter Boy was forced to eat feces. In June of 1997, DHS opens an investigation case against the Kemas. Now, I don't know why it took 2 months after the cousin reported what happened to Peter Boy for DHS to open the case, but that's, what happened. In June of 1997 would also be the last time that Peter Boy's siblings would last see him alive. In July of 1997, Peter Kema Sr. and Jaylin Kema meet with the social worker without Peter Boy. And when the social worker asks where Peter Boy is, they say that he is with relatives.
Okay, did you folks want to start off with some kind of message to the public or anything you'd like to say?
I wanted to ask the public to find my son, or to help me find my son, or my auntie, or if they've seen him around in Oahu.
When did you last see Peter Boy?
Last year, August. 97.
And where?
Pardon me?
Where did you last see him?
I'm at Olive Park.
And the circumstances that led you to leave him with Auntie Rose were what?
Personal reasons.
How was, did you explain to him that you were leaving him with Auntie Rose?
Yes, I did.
And what was your son's reaction?
His reaction said, "Okay, Dad."
What did you tell him?
I wanted him to know that I was coming back to the Big Island and he'll be staying with Auntie Rose.
Did you say why? Did you tell him why?
No, I did not say why.
When you last saw your son, oh, well, let me back up. What kind of arrangement was made with Auntie Rose as far as the care of your son?
I asked her to take care of him and raise him like was her own.
Peter, why did you leave him with her?
Well, I was running out of money and I couldn't support him too much, so I was taking of his health and shelter.
Why did you choose her?
I knew her when I was young, about 15 years ago.
In what capacity? I mean, did you stay with her in the past? Or?
Yeah.
And how well did you know her?
Pretty well. I took her in like a second mom.
And you lived with her in Hilo?
No, I live with her in Kona.
Well, so she's originally from Kona then?
Oahu.
And you lived with her, but you lived with her in Kona at one time?
Yeah.
What did Auntie Rose say when you asked her to take care of Peter?
She agreed. She said she has no problem with that.
I'd like to ask a question. Peter, did you expect Auntie Rose to maintain contact with you? Can you talk about that? Did you provide her information for you? Did you expect to hear from your son?
Yeah, but I didn't have no contact after that.
What information did you give her?
I gave her address and our previous number, but our number had changed to a phone number, so I gave her address and whatnot, our address.
Where do you have any idea on where she might be at this time with your son?
Well, she probably said she was going to move to Florida.
For what? Does she have a job or relatives or something like that?
The only explanation said that over there is much cheaper.
Peter, we understand you went to Oahu last week.
Yes,
to
I
help
did.
Police. Was that successful? Did that turn up any leads or any way in finding her?
Well, the police department did do an investigation, and they did find a couple of people that saw her, but don't know her name of the description we gave them and whatnot. So it was pretty beneficial. Yeah.
What do you think of the fact that no one's been able to locate her? The police have been unable to find her. Nobody. What do you think of that?
I'm kind of afraid. Yeah, I'm afraid. I'm wondering how come my auntie doesn't want to surrender him over to police or somebody close, or bring him back. Because it's very hard on us right now.
Can you talk about why, in what ways it's hard on you? What kinds of, I guess, obviously when there's some sort of pressures as a result of this?
Emotionally, physically, can't sleep, can't eat. It's very hard. Now since DHS took away the other 3 remaining children, it's like double the pressure. But my focus is trying to find my son right now.
In the months between the time that you left him with Auntie Rose until now, or until I guess this police investigation, did you have was there any thought in your mind or any concern as far as your son's safety or whereabouts during that period?
For myself, I figured he would be safe with her. Then wouldn't be no problem, because I never thought she would probably move this soon. Because the last time somebody seen her over there was 3 weeks ago, in a while. But the guy the one told us that she seen her. She didn't notice if she had a kid with her or what, my son.
Where do you think your son is?
I hope he's still in Oahu right now. I really hope so.
Do you think he's safe?
At this moment, no, because she doesn't want to bring him out and show him to anybody. So I'm kind of getting really concerned about that.
Some of your family members have said they're afraid that he might not be alive. Do you think he's alive?
I do think he's alive. My family members, well, I guess they can make their own judgments with this kind of stuff and whatnot. But it's really hard right now.
Excuse me, can you give me that phone?
What do you think about what they've said so far? That that they're concerned that you folks as parents didn't report him missing to police earlier.
Like I said, I knew he was safe, but at this point, I can't say now, because I don't know where she took him. I don't know if she gave him away. I don't know if she sold him. I have no idea now.
Can you tell us a little bit, as much as you know about her, about Auntie Rose? I mean, you know, you said you knew her for what, 15 years now, and is she? My understanding, she's not a blood relative. She's a,
no.
She's like a Hanai.
Yeah,
auntie.
Hanai auntie.
And when did you first meet her? You said like what, 15 years ago or something?
About 11 years old.
11
Yeah.
years.
Peter, some of your relatives have said they don't think this Auntie Rose exists. They think that you're making this story up. What do you say about that?
Well, like I said, they could say whatever they want to. But when my mom passed away, only my uncle Moki and me used to live together, and everybody else was all separated. Everybody else went different places to live, and like I was only alone by myself, and I had never had nobody. I needed somebody to look up as a mama. And when my mom passed away, oh boy, that really broke my heart that down. So I kind of looked up at her as like a parent already. I needed like a lady figure in my life, huh? Like a mother figure.
So that is the story the Kemas were telling everyone. Peter Kema Sr. said that he had very difficulty finding work. He had a hard time, finding a job, and so he was struggling with providing for his family. And so the decision was to have Peter Boy go with this Auntie Rose Makuakane because she was better equipped to take care of Peter Boy. Of course, police officials checked, the story, and they could not find any traces of any airline tickets of Peter Kema Sr. and Peter Boy traveling from the Big Island to Oahu. They could not find this Auntie Rose Makuakane that supposedly was a Lauhala weaver selling hats. And when officials checked school records on Oahu for Peter Boy, they could not find him anywhere. So it became this thing as, where is Peter? So where's Peter? There was like no traces of him. It's like he just disappeared into thin air. And it wasn't until January 9th of 1998, a social worker urged Jaylin Kema to file a missing report, to make a missing report of her son, Peter Boy, because up until this point, to be honest, it didn't seem like Jaylin Kema was really worried about where her son was. They just, you know, played it off as like, oh, Auntie Rose Makuakane has Peter Boy and he's fine. So in January 1998, Jaylin finally makes a missing persons report on her son. And on February 5th, 1998, police finally released a photo of Peter Boy Jr. On April 15, 1998, police officials say that it is a probability that Peter Boy Jr. is dead. And on April 22nd, 1998, the children, Alan, Chantel, and they do have another daughter at this point. I believe her name is Darylyn. So all the children are placed in foster care. And in 1999, Alan and Chantel's father, William Collier, gained full custody of his two children, and the Coles gained custody of Darylyn in 2000. On April 23, 1998, a worker assesses the Kema kids and said that when she mentioned Peter Boy Jr.'s name, that all of the kids showed fear. And this gave her the impression that the kids knew about something that had happened to Peter Boy Jr., but they were so afraid to say anything. On April 24, 1998, Big Island police take Peter Kema Sr. to Ala Park so that he can retrace his steps about where he might have handed Peter Boy Jr. off to Auntie Rose Makuakane. And Peter Kema Sr., he makes an odd statement, and he says, "I did not kill my son," which is such an odd statement to make. Like, why would you even say something like that? In March of 1999, police submit the case to prosecutors, but no one is charged. So after this, you know, the year 2000, 2001, Peter Boy Jr. is still nowhere to be found. Nobody has seen him. Nobody's coming forward. You know, nobody knows what happened to him. In April 2005, a woman by the name of Lillian Collar, who was the head of DHS, released some 23 pages of documents related to Peter Boy's case that was once confidential. About a month or so later, she releases some 2,000 pages that were made to the public. The documents detailed the horrific abuse that Peter Boy Jr. and his siblings suffered at the hands of Peter Kema Sr. Some of the horrific abuse that Peter Boy Jr. suffered was being tied up with chains and ropes, being forced in a trash can naked. Peter Boy Jr. was forced to eat feces. Peter Boy was always left in the trunk of the car whenever the family went on outings. He was always covered up with blankets. Peter Boy Jr. wasn't allowed to play like his other siblings were allowed to play, but Peter Boy Jr. was not. Peter Kema Sr. would just beat on Peter Boy Jr. All of the children would get spankings from Peter Kema Sr., but Peter Boy Jr. had it the worst. As you can say, he was the scapegoat. He was always picked on, just neglected. I know there's a book that Lillian Collar had published. I believe it's on Amazon. Just basically all of the abuse that the children suffered. It's so crazy to think that even after having these documents that, you know, note all of the abuse that Peter Boy Jr. and his siblings suffered at the hands of Peter Kema Sr., even with all of that, there was not enough evidence to charge the Kemas for Peter Boy Jr.'s disappearance. And largely in part because there was no body, right? Peter Boy Jr. was still missing. And you can't just assume that someone killed someone just because they're missing, even though, you know, all of the evidence points to that. In 2014, the Big Island prosecutor named Mitch Roth decides to revisit the case. In 2015, the Kemas were brought in and arrested for drug and firearm offense and welfare fraud, and this was the prime time to kind of get back to the Peter Boy Jr. case. In 2016, a grand jury indicts both parents for second-degree murder by omission. In December of 2016, Jaylin pleads guilty to manslaughter, and her sentence is 1 year in prison and 10 years probation, and she does agree to testify against her husband. Peter Kema Sr. in April of 2017 pleads guilty to murder, and he is sentenced to 20 years in prison with the possibility of parole. Now, both of the Kemas were offered plea deals, and this is the result of the plea deals. And now, I know what you guys are thinking, because I thought that way too, that the punishment was weak, and I don't feel like they got what they deserved. I feel like the sentences should have been a lot harsher, stricter, only because they spent, you know, over 20 years free. You know, they were able to live their lives for over 20 plus years, while Peter Boy Jr. didn't. You know, I don't think justice was served to the fullest, in my opinion. You guys can let me know what you think in the comment section. So anyways, that is what happened. But I also understand the prosecution's office. Like, they want to give the family some sort of closure. They want to give some sort of justice. And they really want to know what happened to Peter Boy Jr. after all these years. So, an agreement and stipulation of Peter Kema Sr.'s sentence was that he was supposed to take officials to where he disposed of Peter Boy's body, to which he did. He disposed of Peter Boy's body at this remote location, some scenic point on the Big Island. He had attempted to burn Peter Boy's body, but when he realized that, you know, he can't burn the body, he put Peter Boy's body into a cardboard box and threw Peter Boy in the ocean at this scenic point. I think it's on the Big Island somewhere, maybe in Puna, I'm not exactly sure, but he did bring officials to the exact location. Now, Peter Kema Sr. had to take a lie detector test to ensure that he was telling the truth, and he did pass. Officials believe that Peter Boy Jr. died of septic shock, and I say that because the Kemas had said that Peter Boy had this huge cut in his arm, so big that you could fit your finger inside. And so of course, like any open cut that is left untreated becomes very smelly, you know, stinky. And Peter Boy's siblings said that you know, when Peter Boy was locked in the room, that room became nicknamed the stinky room, and because that's how bad, you know, the smell got. And so the Kemas did not provide medical care for Peter Boy's cut, and so officials and medical professionals believe that Peter Boy died of septic shock because of that cut that was on his arm that was left untreated. I believe Jaylin Kema died in January of 2019. Don't quote me on that, due to renal failure, kidney failure. I believe she did have diabetes. So Jaylin Kema passed away in 2019. And Peter Kema Sr. is currently serving his time behind bars, thank the good Lord. Present day, what I've heard is that the siblings of Peter Boy are trying to bring a civil lawsuit against the state, because the state did return Peter Boy back to his parents after all of the horrific abuse. And so I'm not sure where that case stands. I know the judge did one judge did give okay so that the siblings could go ahead and file that lawsuit. I do hope and pray that there is some, you know, financial relief for the siblings. And you know, it's one of those things that, you know, no amount of money is gonna bring back Peter Boy, but you know, somebody has to pay, something has to happen, right? And unfortunately, sometimes financial gain is the only way that some departments will ever learn. All right, that's all I got for you guys today. Thank you so much for stopping by. I do hope you hit that like button and share this video wherever you can. I want to know what you guys think. Do you guys think that Peter Kema Sr. got the right punishment? Do you think he should have got more time in prison? What are your thoughts? I do want to know. Do you remember when this case came out in Hawaii? Do you remember when there was those bumper stickers, so where's Peter? Let me know your thoughts, please. I'm super, super interested. All right, guys. I will see you next week. Aloha. Bye. Bye.